He was driving along the road, slightly speeding. He was stopped by a policeman. Arthur said it wasn't his fault. He had to drive fast to leave the lake as soon as possible. He saw the ghost of a woman. She had long blonde hair and no shoes on her feet. Her eyes were dark voids, and she floated silently above the ground, her white dress billowing as if caught in an unseen wind. The policeman looked skeptical, but Arthur insisted. "You have to believe me," he pleaded. "I know it sounds crazy, but she was there, right in the middle of the road. I barely avoided hitting her. When I looked back, she was gone. I heard her whispering, telling me to leave." The policeman frowned and took a step back, his flashlight flickering as if in response to an unseen presence. "What did she say?" he asked, his voice low and wary. Arthur swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously around the darkened road. She said, he stammered, the words sticking in his throat. A cold breeze swept through the trees, rustling the leaves and sending a shiver down his spine. Suddenly, the radio in the patrol car crackled to life, and a voice came through, filled with static and urgency. "All units, be advised. We've received multiple reports of sightings near the lake. Proceed with caution." The policeman's eyes widened, and he glanced back at Arthur. "Get in the car," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We're going back to the lake." As they drove back towards the water, the shadows seemed to grow longer, and an eerie silence fell over the landscape. Arthur's heart pounded in his chest, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Just as they rounded the final bend, the car's headlights illuminated the edge of the lake, and there, standing at the water's edge, was the ghostly figure of the woman, her long blonde hair glowing in the moonlight, her eyes fixed on the approaching vehicle. The engine sputtered and died, leaving them in darkness. Arthur and the policeman exchanged tense glances, both aware that something unnatural was at play. The policeman reached for his flashlight, but it refused to turn on. "Stay here," he whispered, opening the car door as quietly as he could. Arthur's breath fogged up the window as he watched the policeman step out into the night. The ghostly woman remained by the lake, her form shimmering ethereally in the moonlight. The policeman took a few cautious steps towards her, his hand hovering over his holstered weapon. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice trembling slightly. "Do you need help?" The woman turned her head slowly, her dark voids of eyes locking onto the policeman. She raised an arm and pointed to something in the water, her lips moving as if uttering a silent plea. Arthur, unable to stay put, quietly slipped out of the car and followed. The air grew colder with each step, and an oppressive silence weighed down on them. When he reached the policeman's side, he saw what the ghost was pointing at, a submerged vehicle, its rusted roof just visible beneath the water's surface. "That's my car," Arthur whispered, his voice barely audible. "The one that went missing 10 years ago." The policeman's eyes widened in shock. "What are you talking about?" Arthur's voice trembled as he explained. "I was in an accident. I survived, but they never found the car. Or her." He gestured to the ghostly woman, who now seemed more sorrowful than menacing. "She was with me that night." The ghost took a step closer, her lips forming a single word that Arthur could barely make out. "Remember." Suddenly, the lake's surface began to ripple, and a deep, unnatural groan emanated from the submerged car. The ghost's form started to dissolve into mist, but her eyes remained locked on Arthur's, imploring him to understand something crucial. The policeman grabbed Arthur's arm. "We need to call for backup. This is way beyond us." But Arthur shook his head, his gaze fixed on the lake. "No, I have to find out what really happened that night. She's trying to tell us something." The policeman hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but we do this carefully." They approached the lake's edge, the water lapping eerily at their feet. As they stared into the depths, a faint, otherworldly glow began to emanate from the submerged car, illuminating something inside that made Arthur's blood run cold. Just as they were about to turn back, the ground beneath them started to shake. The ghostly woman's voice echoed around them, louder now, filled with urgency and despair. "Remember," she cried, "you must." But before she could finish, a pair of cold, clammy hands shot out from the water, grabbing Arthur's leg and pulling him down into the icy depths. Arthur thrashed wildly, his hands clawing at the air as he was dragged into the freezing water. The policeman lunged, grabbing Arthur's arm and struggling to pull him back. The ghostly hands were relentless, their grip unyielding, but the policeman's determination was stronger. With a final, desperate heave, the policeman yanked Arthur free, and they both tumbled onto the shore, gasping for breath. The ghostly woman hovered above them, her eyes filled with sorrow and desperation. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice carrying on the wind, "you must remember. It's the only way to end this." Arthur, shivering uncontrollably, looked up at the ghost. "Remember what?" he cried. "What are you trying to tell me?" The ghost pointed to the submerged car again. "The truth lies beneath," she said, her form flickering like a dying candle. "You must face it." The policeman, now equally invested in the mystery, nodded. "We need to see what's in that car. Maybe there's something that will explain all of this." Arthur, still trembling, agreed. "But how? We can't just dive in." The policeman thought for a moment, then retrieved a length of rope from his patrol car. "We'll tie this around you. I'll stay here and make sure you can get back up. It's risky, but it's the only way." Arthur took a deep breath and nodded. They secured the rope around his waist, and he stepped cautiously into the water. The icy cold bit into his skin, but he forced himself to wade deeper until he was submerged up to his chest. The ghost's form hovered above the water, guiding him towards the car. As he reached it, he took a deep breath and plunged under the surface. The water was murky, but the glow from the car provided just enough light to see. Inside the vehicle, Arthur saw something that made his heart stop. There, in the driver's seat, was a skeleton, its bony fingers still gripping the steering wheel. And in the passenger seat, a tattered diary lay open, its pages waterlogged but still readable. Arthur grabbed the diary and kicked back towards the surface. As he broke through the water, he held up his find triumphantly. The policeman pulled him back to shore, where they both collapsed, panting. Arthur opened the diary with trembling hands. The pages were filled with entries, each one detailing a love story turned tragic. The final entry, written in shaky handwriting, described a fateful night at the lake, a night of a terrible argument, a crash, and the desperate attempt to save a loved one. Arthur's eyes widened as the memories flooded back. "It was my fault," he whispered. "I lost control of the car. She died because of me." The ghostly woman nodded, her form growing fainter. "Now you remember," she said softly. "Now you can set us both free." With tears streaming down his face, Arthur looked up at the ghost. "I'm so sorry," he choked out. "I never meant for any of this to happen." The ghost smiled sadly, and for the first time, her eyes showed a hint of peace. "It's time for you to let go," she whispered, "and for me to find rest." As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, the ghostly woman faded into the morning mist, her presence finally at peace. Arthur and the policeman sat in silence, the weight of the night's revelations heavy on their hearts. But just as they thought it was over, the radio crackled to life once more. "All units, be advised. New reports of strange occurrences at the lake. Proceed with caution." Arthur and the policeman exchanged wary glances. The nightmare was not yet over. The lake still held its secrets, and the true horror had only just begun. Arthur and the policeman exchanged wary glances. The nightmare was not yet over. The lake still held its secrets, and the true horror had only just begun. "Stay here," the policeman said, his voice firm. "I'll check the perimeter and see if there are any more disturbances." Arthur nodded, still clutching the waterlogged diary. The policeman disappeared into the woods, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Arthur's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of his memory. He opened the diary again, skimming through the entries. One passage stood out. July 13th, she keeps talking about the lake, about something she saw there when she was a child. She's scared. I've never seen her like this. I promised her we wouldn't go back, but something is drawing her there. It's almost like she's under a spell. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. The date of the entry was the same night of the accident. There was more to the story, something he had yet to uncover. He turned to the last page, where a map had been hastily drawn, marking a spot deep in the woods near the lake. Just then, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night, coming from the direction the policeman had gone. Arthur sprang to his feet, adrenaline surging through him. He grabbed the flashlight from the patrol car and followed the sound, heart pounding. The forest was thick and oppressive, branches clawing at him as he pushed through. He stumbled upon the policeman, lying unconscious on the ground, his flashlight shattered beside him. Arthur knelt beside him, checking for a pulse. It was weak, but he was alive. A rustling noise made Arthur look up. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was a figure. Not the ghostly woman, but something else tall, shadowy, with eyes that glowed an unnatural red. "You shouldn't have come back," the figure hissed, its voice a sinister whisper that seemed to echo from all around. Arthur backed away, dragging the policeman with him. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice shaking. The figure stepped forward, its form becoming more distinct. It was a man, or at least it had been once. Now, it was something else entirely, twisted by malevolent energy. "I am the guardian of this place," it said, "and you have disturbed its peace." Arthur's mind raced. The diary, the map, there was something here, something that had drawn both him and his girlfriend to the lake all those years ago. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. The figure pointed a skeletal finger at Arthur. "You must finish what you started. Only then can the curse be lifted." Arthur looked down at the diary, the map still clutched in his hand. The map, he realized. It leads to something important, doesn't it? The figure nodded. "Follow it, and you will find the truth. But beware, the path is fraught with danger." Arthur glanced at the unconscious policeman, then back at the figure. "I have to help him first." The figure's eyes flared red. "There is no time. The curse will consume you both if you do not act now." With a heavy heart, Arthur propped the policeman against a tree, hoping he would recover soon. He turned to the figure. "Show me the way." The figure began to dissolve into the shadows, leaving a faint trail of glowing footprints for Arthur to follow. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead, and plunged deeper into the forest. The path was treacherous, with roots and rocks threatening to trip him at every step. The further he went, the more the air seemed to thrum with a dark energy. He reached a clearing where the map indicated an X. In the center stood an ancient stone altar, covered in moss and strange carvings. As he approached, the ghostly woman reappeared, her form shimmering in the dawn light. "Arthur," she said, her voice gentle now, "you found it. The place where it all began." Arthur placed the diary on the altar. "What do I need to do?" he asked. "Remember," she whispered, "remember the truth." Arthur closed his eyes, the memories flooding back with startling clarity. The night of the accident, the argument, the sudden swerve to avoid hitting something, a shadowy figure in the road. He opened his eyes, understanding dawning. "It wasn't just an accident," he said. "We were lured here." The ghost nodded. "The guardian has been here for centuries, bound to this place. Only by confronting him can we break the curse." As she spoke, the shadowy figure reappeared at the edge of the clearing, its eyes burning with rage. "You have remembered," it snarled. "Now face your destiny." Arthur stood his ground, the weight of the diary in his hands. "I won't run anymore." The figure lunged, and Arthur raised the diary, the pages glowing with a brilliant light. The shadowy figure screamed as the light enveloped it, the dark energy dissipating into the air. When the light faded, the figure was gone, and the ghostly woman stood before Arthur, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "You set us free." The first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, and Arthur felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The curse was lifted, and the lake was finally at rest. But as he turned to help the policeman, a new sound reached his ears, a low, ominous growl from deep within the forest. Arthur's relief was short-lived. There was still one more secret the lake had yet to reveal. Arthur's heart pounded as the low growl echoed through the forest. He looked around, ready to face whatever new terror waited. But as the sound grew louder, it transformed, not into a threat, but into a gentle hum, like the rustling of leaves in a summer breeze. The ghostly woman smiled, her form becoming more solid and lifelike. "The lake is thanking you," she said softly. "You've broken the curse that held this place in darkness for so long." Arthur looked at the altar, now bathed in the warm glow of the morning sun. The carvings on the stone seemed to shimmer with life, and the oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the forest lifted, replaced by a serene calm. The policeman groaned, stirring from his unconscious state. Arthur rushed to his side, helping him to sit up. "Are you okay?" he asked, relief flooding his voice. The policeman nodded slowly, blinking as he took in their surroundings. "What happened?" Arthur glanced back at the ghostly woman, who was now almost completely solid, her eyes full of peace. "We broke the curse," he explained. "The lake is free." The woman approached them, her feet touching the ground now, no longer floating. "Arthur, you saved us all," she said. "Thank you." Tears filled Arthur's eyes as he reached out to her. "I'm so sorry for what happened. I never meant for any of this." She took his hand, her touch warm and real. "You've given me peace," she said. "That's all I ever wanted." With a final, grateful smile, she began to dissolve into the morning light, her spirit finally at rest. Arthur watched her go, feeling a profound sense of closure. The policeman, now fully conscious, stood up with Arthur's help. "We should get back and report this," he said, glancing around the now peaceful clearing. Arthur nodded. "Yes, but first, we need to make sure the lake stays protected." They made their way back to the patrol car, the forest now bright and welcoming in the daylight. As they drove away from the lake, Arthur felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had faced his past, confronted the darkness, and come out the other side. Back in town, they reported the night's events. The local authorities were skeptical at first, but the undeniable change in the lake's atmosphere and the disappearance of the strange occurrences convinced them to take measures to protect the area. Arthur visited the lake often, not out of fear, but out of respect. He would sit by the water, feeling the calmness and remembering the woman he had loved and lost. It was a place of peace now, where the past had been reconciled and the future could begin anew. Years later, a small memorial was placed by the lake's edge, dedicated to those who had lost their lives there and to Arthur's bravery. The community came to see the lake as a place of reflection and healing, a testament to the power of facing one's fears and the possibility of redemption. Arthur found solace in knowing that he had made a difference. The lake was no longer a place of dread but a sanctuary of peace, a symbol of the resilience of the human spirit. And as he sat by the water, the gentle hum of the forest around him, he knew he had finally found the closure he had been seeking for so long.